Good afternoon. Welcome everybody to #GotMoney. I'm Elizabeth Jackson. So as you know, we're in a really interesting place around COVID. It's a new landscape for everybody, and I'm really interested in employment. And my major concern here is the casualisation of employment. And I was looking at who would be the very best person to come and interview on the show, somebody that's at the coalface of it, that's working really hard for us, the average Australian worker, which are really the guys that keep the lights on when some of us are at home in bed. So I welcome Sally McManus, who is the Australian trade unionist and political activist who has served as the Secretary of the Australian Council of Trade Unions since 2017. She is also the first woman to hold the position of Secretary in the ACTU's history of 90 years. Congratulations. That's a pretty massive milestone for any woman, isn't it?
Yeah, cheers. Thanks, Elizabeth. It's good to be on your show.
Pleasure. Thank you for joining us. So COVID and your work, how is it for you out there currently?
Well, the number one focus is obviously about people dying. That's got to be the number one focus. And, really mindful that there's over 1,000 workers who are healthcare workers in Victoria that have, are infected. So they've really put themselves on the line and literally are now sort of facing their own health problems because of it. So there's that aspect, but it's obviously not just that aspect. The whole effect on jobs is huge, like the amount of jobs that have been lost, the types of jobs that have been lost, the uncertainty going forward about what is it going to mean in terms of everyone's employment, everything that's got to be dealt with around all of that is huge, like everything from day-to-day, safe workplaces, keeping people safe, to trying to get JobKeeper and JobSeeker staying where they are. So, yeah, this is not like a situation that any trade union leaders have been through since, the war, but not even really then. So, it's challenging and ongoing. I'd describe it as pretty relentless.
Yeah, it must be for you right now. So with JobKeepers, you're lobbying the government to keep JobKeepers where it is. How's that battle going for you?
Well, the government didn't want to extend JobKeeper at all. So, your listeners, if they don't know, it was meant to expire on the 28th of September. And so there was a lot of work done, lobbying done, effectively representation of from the ACTU, from unions, that it needed to be extended. And, it became just more and more obvious this was the case because, there's a whole lot of industries, forget Victoria, there's a whole lot of industries that are just been smashed. And so you think about the arts and entertainment industry, they can't sort of see where the end of this will be without a vaccine, because you won't be able to have large gatherings of people, and their whole work is large gatherings of people. So that's a lot of people that will be affected. Plus then you've got the aviation industry, everyone who's working there or connected to the aviation industry or in tourism. So international borders aren't going to be open for the foreseeable future. They've all been smashed. And then you've got, of course, what's happened in Victoria with the lockdown. I think in the end, of course, it was, our excellent advocacy, but also just the facts overwhelmed. Really, I think, the things they had to consider, and they then did agree to extend it. However, they're proposing to cut down the rates, so from $1,500 a fortnight to $1,200 a fortnight for full-time workers and $750 for part-time workers, and then step it down again come the 1st of January. So we've been arguing that the rates need to stay the same because a whole lot of people are actually in worse pain than they were back in April.
So it's my understanding that the likelihood of that happening is pretty null. Is that your feeling, that the government will in actual fact lower the rate?
Well, I think it's very hard to get a government to walk back once they've announced something. It's not unheard of, but it just means that it's much, much, much tougher. but you always learn as a trade unionist just not to give up, because, you know, if you're still there in the fight, at the critical point, you may still win. I mean, the only thing you've got to, you know, the only thing that will stop you from winning is giving up. So, you know, we're intending to keep on it. Actually, this decision gets made by the Treasurer. He sort of makes rules about what the rates would be. So at any point he could decide to change those as well.
So you're optimistic as well. That's good.
Well, you've got to be. I mean, you're right to say that the chances are very low, but I wouldn't put them at nil.
That's good. I like that you're an optimist, because you've been doing this for a long time. You didn't just arrive in this job. You were this type of person at university, weren't you?
It depends what you mean by this type of person.
Well, you're a battler. I was listening to some interviews that you had done. I was really moved by this. You're fairly relentless, and it seems to me like you didn't just wake up one morning and be relentless. You've always been like that. Did you come from a family background of trade unionists? How did this come about?
No, I didn't come from a family of trade unionists. Like, my father was a union member, but back in the day, half the country were union members, so it wasn't that really extraordinary, and he wasn't an activist at all either. So, you know, really for me, there was a huge teacher strike when I was in high school, and that our class sizes were being expanded, and we were losing our teachers in the middle of our sort of year 11 and year 12, and so that had a big impact, just sort of that the power of collective action and the ability to do that. When you go to the issue of being relentless, I think that you learn that. It's not right to say that you're just born that way. You learn that, and so what I've learned is you know, those lessons just over and over again. Like, there's been lots of fights that I've been involved in where people have just told you you'll never win, and if you took what they said to you in the beginning and you gave up, well, you never would have won. And so I sort of look back at a lot of those, and I've taken lessons out of them that, you know, just keeping going and being relentless can lead to victory, even if you can't see it at a particular point. And so if something's worth fighting for, you've just got to keep fighting for it. And sometimes, like, victories, they're not in your lifetime. They'll take generations. They'll take a long time to change attitudes around things. And so, you know, you look back at, like, lots of the big achievements that have been made, whether it by women or whether it be by, you know, the gay and lesbian community. It's been, people have stuck to it, and they've stuck to it over generations and built on it over that time. So maybe that we can't achieve everything we want the time I'm the ACTU leader, but at least I'll pass on to the next person the baton and say, there you go.
There you go. Keep hammering away at
it. We didn't take it backwards. It's your job now to take it forward.
How's your memberships currently? Do you have as many members as you? Are you continuing to grow that base?
Yeah, so there was a big surge of union members when the coronavirus hit. So this was in particular around March and April, when I think a whole lot of workers just, in a way, probably just thought, oh yeah, you know, the union's good, but I don't really need it, or I'll get around to joining one day, and all of a sudden they really, really did need it. And so that we've seen pretty much since the beginning of this year, growth in membership.
Does that give you more power and a stronger voice with government?
Always there's more power when you've got numbers. It just absolutely is, no matter what your situation. In the case of unions, usually it's about how strong you are in a workplace or with an employer. And that strength is about, really, if you can get more than the majority of workers in a union and sticking together, that's the thing that makes a big difference in terms of your bargaining power. If you haven't seen that up close, you can really tell the difference between a workplace where the workers are unionised and they make decisions together and they act collectively, knows where they're not, like where the employer will just do whatever they want whenever they want. So there's those big differences, and it does make a difference, of course, on the national stage as well. But I think in the case of this pandemic, basically, the government's also realised that those essential workers that they've really relied on, everyone's relied on. So whether it be your nurses or your teachers or your truck drivers, a lot of them are highly unionised, workforces. So it's actually been the people that have kept us going are quite often the union members out in the front line.
That's something, isn't it? That gives you the ability to leverage.
Yeah.
Leverage is an incredible thing. So we've just had, there was the announcement yesterday, in actual fact, to create 300,000 more jobs here in Victoria, primarily within the construction industry, of 66 new projects. Is construction enough? Is that enough to hold employment levels here in Victoria? Do you feel like the government needs to spend more money in other sectors to provide employment?
Well, first of all, construction is important because of how large it is, but the knock-on effects it has. So it's not just a building site that you'll see, or a big thing, the big tunnel that's been built. It's all the, factories and service industries, even like your cafes in the CBD, that will then also benefit from that. So that's important, but I think it'd be a big mistake to think that the way out of this recession is in purely blue-collar jobs in masculine industries. And by masculine, I mean industries that are overwhelmingly dominated by men, just because that's what the industry is. And the reason why I say that is that this recession is very different to ones we've had in the past. It's actually young people and women who have been worst hit, and that's because the industries that where more young people and more women are in have been really badly hit. So hospitality, arts and entertainment, retail, childcare, all of those areas, huge impact. And so when you look at the statistics, it's really clear that you can't have a blue collar solution to a so-called pink collar recession. So I do think that there needs to be targeted and thought out programs that are going to grow jobs for everyone, not just for one part. Even though that part's important, it'd be a mistake to just focus on that.
So I have to agree with you, and I'm so glad you talked about that, because it does feel like the government's come up with a really lovely masculine solution to employment, but have really overlooked the women that keep the lights on. So what do they do then? What's the solution? Do you have a plan or anything like that you can submit to government that will start to give female workers consideration?
Yeah, I'll tell you two really obvious things. What about aged care? Look at what a disaster
that has God.
And that you can see the difference, like so starkly in Victoria, the number of deaths in places that are run by the Victorian government that are publicly owned, and those run by the federal government and under control of the federal government that have all been privatised. And the difference is that there's less staff in the private ones because the private providers have been busy trying to work out how can they make money out of aged care. And so the way they make it is they cut corners. They cut corners on the numbers of staff, on meals, as we well know from the Royal Commission, on even medication. So what we've seen is that those places that have had proper staff ratios with trained staff and proper support for the residents have had a very low number of deaths compared to the private ones. And, you don't need to be a genius to work all that out. So, aged care is going to continue to be a big, job creator, because there's more and more old people. And so it's also a social justice thing too, because it's about, how you treat your elders. And so this is an area where, government investment gives back two ways. So you're creating jobs and supporting jobs in an industry that is more feminised, and so giving jobs in an area for women. But also the knock-on effects is that dignity in when you're right at the end of your life, and for the families, and like what price do you want to put on that? Like that's a pretty important thing. So that would be an area. Another area is in childcare. So we saw a brief period of time where childcare was free in this country, like the Liberals stopped it pretty quickly. But the effect on that immediately for people with kids was that they had more disposable income. Anyone with kids knows how expensive it is to have childcare. But this is another place where there's knock-on effects. Not only do you create jobs in that sector, but you also enable more women to participate in the workforce. And then they had, all these smart economists work out what's the effect of increasing women's participation in the workforce. Guess what? The economy grows because there's more taxpayers, there's more skills, all of those things lead to the growth of the economy. So it's another win-win, but unfortunately the mindset of certain governments, they might prefer for women to be at home looking after the kids for free rather than...
I think they do actually. I think that's pretty evident, isn't it?
I think it is.
Josh Freiberg, he's interesting. There was an article, forgive me, let me find this, because I did all this research today. Your president, Michelle O'Neill, said there's no justification whatsoever for changing the workers' rights for businesses that are no longer struggling. Yeah. And Josh Freiberg said, flexibility is introduced during JobKeeper and allowing businesses to change staff hours, work and location should be continued, not just for those firms that meet the reapplied eligibility test, but should apply to those firms on JobKeepers right now. Do you see that this pandemic is going to change the future of employment in Australia? And how do we negate that from happening? How do you get in front of that?
I think that what's been talked about there, even though we don't like it, these are all temporary measures and part of still a wage subsidy, broadly speaking, and that where that's been happening, I don't think that's where our biggest concern is in terms of the future, which you're talking about. I think the concerns are and the challenges we're going to have to meet really to do with working from home. I think this is going to be a big change into the future, and a whole lot of employers thinking that this is a really good idea, and a lot of workers thinking it's a much better idea too. Not as much travel time, they prefer it. Other workers hating it, and so there's a big cost shift that goes on there too. Because I can tell you what, a lot of those big companies in the CBD will be thinking, why are we paying rents for this? We can just outsource all of that to everyone's house. And so all of a sudden the workers taking on the cost of what the employer used to pay for, right down to probably your internet. And then the questions of like the blurring of work and family or work and personal life, and that the mental health impacts on that and on isolation, and what does all that mean? Like, those are really big changes. I do think that some employers will absolutely push for more job insecurity and less wages. It's really about whether or not the federal government will want to go with them, or whether they will think, well, we better not attack those workers who've been on the front line that have got the whole country through the pandemic.
So this evening you're going to be live at Griffin University at 6 p.m. and you're
Not
talking
really,
about... Oh, you'll be in Melbourne. You're doing a better future for all. What's a better future for all?
Well, I don't know. That's their thing that they've called it. So, the ACTU, the union movement, would say a better future for all is a much more equal society where there's fairer distribution of wealth. But like I was saying in the beginning, that's a longer term goal that may not be achieved in the next 6 months.
If you could pull it off in 6 months, mate, you'd be winning the lottery.
Yeah, they'll go to retire.
So what is our next step? If it's not a better future for all straight away, what's our next big step?
In terms of the world of work, I think that we should need to take larger steps than Australia has taken around the issue of equal pay for women. And the other huge thing is that we need to reverse the levels of insecure work that we've got in our country, and that this pandemic has brutally shown that we've got two classes of workers, those with rights and those without rights, those with security, or at least some security, and those with none. And this has been allowed to happen over a period of time. Australia's got one of the highest rates of insecure work out of all the other developed countries. And we let it get to that point, and that I reckon that we've got to now say, okay, stop. we've got to reverse it, and we've got to now look at ways to ensure that, where jobs are casual or their gig, that they are genuinely that, and they're only that for a short period of time, and we're not leaving a whole, generation to never even know what a paid holiday is.
Yeah, there are young people that just, they can't even consider or conceive full-time work, can they? They're completely, it's almost like, for us, our generation, we used to just wake up and walk out the front door and knock on a couple of shops and we had a job. It's just not possible for them. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it.
No problem whatsoever.
You're welcome back here anytime. I really mean that.
Okay.
I love what you've been doing. Your book looks really interesting too. I will dig into it. Thank you for all you do for Australia and particularly for our community. Take care.
Thank you. See ya.
See you.